Well, welcome again now on day number 17. Today's reading 2 Kings chapters 11 and 12. Um, you know, the choppy narratives continue with a bit of challenging reading and even repetition. I believe today's video will be a little bit shorter. Just by way of a brief recap, Jehu had been anointed to be king. He was compelled to eliminate Ahab's male heirs, and Jehu did some good things. He was one of the better kings, although he was not good enough. He cleaned up the situation, but he didn't clean extensively, thoroughly. And so here we are now into chapter number 11. There's a bit of fighting that is going on, and of course this is what we've seen now for several chapters. By comparison, in 1st and 2nd Samuel, there was a bit of fighting, but most of it was against the Philistines and other comparable outsider enemies. And so especially in this part of the world and this time period, everyone expected to have ongoing battles with what we would call other nations or other clans, things of that nature. 1st and 2nd Samuel was filled with that kind of fighting. And then when we opened up 1st Kings, I remarked on how we didn't see any fighting. With Solomon, it was all about the temple, and there seemed to be a time of peace until Solomon had made mistakes, and then there was fighting that was recorded after that with some foreign peoples. But here, as the situation has progressed or regressed, even now there's all kinds of fighting, and most of it is internal conflict. Ever since Israel divided into the northern and southern kingdoms of Israel and Judah, there's been a great bit of fighting. And so here, in all of this fighting here in chapter number 11, we read of Jehoiada the priest. Now, here we haven't heard much about the priesthood in a while, but now with the priest being mentioned here in this narrative, Jehoiada, we bring back the temple to remembrance. In a sense, this idea of the temple and a larger narrative is something that was foreshadowed in 1st and 2nd Samuel. Remember, early on in 1st Samuel, there was the covenant group here, Israel. They lost the Ark of the Covenant, which represented the presence of God, the throne of God himself. And 1st Samuel had a variety, even 2nd Samuel, early 2nd Samuel, there was a variety of activities surrounding this Ark of the Covenant. Then in 2nd Samuel, David had wanted to build a temple, a permanent residence for this Ark, and yet God allowed him to collect the materials, but because he was a man of war, too much bloodshed on his hands, he was going to let Solomon take care of building that temple. And so we have a certain idea from that. David, who was a warrior, too much bloodshed to build a temple. Maybe I should have exercised that more back at the time. But, and here we have in 2 Kings, there's a lot of bloodshed again. And we haven't heard anything about the temple until now. Jehoiada, the priest, reminds us of the temple, which was in the early part of 1st Kings. It looked like, as the temple was being built and all of the dimensions, all of the details, that things are reaching a certain peak of the Jewish story. And it did reach a certain climatic scene, but then it has regressed since that time. Well, Jehoiada, the priest, is doing is one who's going to clean up the spills, as it were. He's going to do what it seems like has to be done in every generation throughout this narrative: deal with Baal and the temples made to Baal, and the prophets and priests of Baal. And Jehoiada is going to try to clean house, kind of like Jehu did in the previous reading, and as others had done in other readings. And in fact, as it moves into chapter number 12, Jehoash is king, but the priest Jehoiada is still going to be influential with Jehoash. And Jehoash is able to do some good things. However, it remarks that he did not eliminate the high places here in chapter 12, verse 3. That the high places, it's in verse 2, the Lord approved of him. Jehoiada the priest taught him, but the high places were not eliminated. He didn't go far enough. He didn't remove the altars that these people had to the pagan gods. But what he did do is remember the temple. Since the time of Solomon, it's been several generations. A building has to be maintained. Jehoash is going to remember the temple and is going to delegate silver and gold to go towards a certain restoration of the temple and repair of the temple. And so, that at least was a success under his reign. Here in chapter 12 is really it's not the most engaging reading that we've encountered since we started 1 Samuel, but yet compared to the rest of 1st and 2nd Kings, it's more of a relaxing reading. The temple is remembered. And so we still have in the broader narrative the juxtaposition of God's temple versus the temples of Baal and the high places and altars of Baal. And I suppose the reflective question could evolve into this at this point. So now that the temple is being remembered here, is that going to be symbolic of any other positive steps that are forthcoming? Well, we'll just see, and I'll meet you again tomorrow. Thank you all for your patience and for joining with me, your commitment during these readings.